What's up, friends? Today we are here on another new board, and today we're here on the Meepo V3 Max. Now, the Meepo V3 Max sits in sort of an interesting spot in Meepo's lineup because it's right in between the V5, which apparently is now called the M1. I don't think they made any specific announcement about that, but I did review the V5, and the board that shares the same exact specs as it, as well as the same exact looks, is now called the M1 on their website. So, you know, the more you know. But in any case, this sits right in between those two boards in price. So you have sort of an interesting comparison to make between the very low range of the Meepo V5, aka M1, and the medium range, which is the Envy, which I believe is around $750 or $799 right now. This is around $439, I think. I'll put the exact prices of each of them on the screen because I want to make sure I get whatever the latest price is. But in any case, this is smack in between them. And interestingly enough, the specs on this are a little bit closer to the specs on the Envy than they are the specs on the M1. So the one determining factor, though, is that this is hub motors and the Envy is only belt drive, which, in my opinion, is the more superior drive system. But not everyone thinks that, and of course, there's going to be plenty of people that value their wallet more than their exact drive system. However, there are some serious advantages to belt drives, namely that you can use pretty much whatever wheels you want, which means you can try out different sizes, you can try out different types of wheels, rubber versus urethane, cloud wheels, stuff like that, versus hub motors where you're just stuck with whatever the sleeve design is on there. And there are some hub motor mods that you can do, like, for example, Cloud Wheel has several different options for hub sleeves that can replace your stock ones, and I would assume that they're going to make ones for the V3 Max. I don't know if these are brand new hub motors or not, so I'm not sure if they share a sleeve with any of Meepo's other products in the past. They are definitely different than the hub motors that are on the V5. I think they're a little bit more powerful, and they certainly look different. I will say, I gotta give Meepo props for the looks on these hub motors. They do look very slick. They have a really cool machined design on the front face, and the yellow just kind of pops. I think it's obviously gonna differ depending on what colors you like, but I think it looks cool. And it's a nice little pop on an otherwise boring, tiny piece of urethane. That being said, these hub motors so far are pretty decent. You don't come into a board like this expecting top tier performance, and of course that's not what you're going to get. But what we are having here right now is really nice, smooth performance with an okay amount of power. It's absolutely not impressive, but it is definitely more than the V5. And once we do the actual performance tests and do a comparison of our drag times and stuff, we'll be able to see exactly how much better it is. But going off of feel, it definitely has a little bit more. And where that's most noticeable is above 10 miles an hour. And that sounds like a really low number, but the V5 really struggled to get to its top speed in the first place and to stay there consistently over any kind of hill. And it seems like this is going to be able to do that a lot more consistently, which is great. It means that you get a cheaper intro board with the ability to still, you know, commute and do some very small group rides. Now, I don't really know what the range is going to come out to on this thing, because we are talking 18650 cells still, and it is a bigger battery, than the V5, coming in at 12S3P. However, they are still 18650s, and unless they're Molly cells, which I highly doubt that they are, they're probably going to be a little bit lower on the performance side. However, it is still a bigger battery than the V5, and technically, by cell count, it's a bigger battery than the NV, but the NV uses 21700, so I expect this to be somewhere between the range of the V5 and the NV, hopefully closer to the NV side. I'm hoping for around maybe 10 miles on this, maybe 12. It kind of depends on how good those cells are. When we open up the board for the 4View, I might be able to take a peek at what cells they are or ask my Meepo rep, but they're probably not super high in capacity given the price point, which again, you really have to set your expectations for a $450-ish board. Right now, we're cruising at around 18 miles an hour on a decently rough pavement. And when I first rode the V5, which if you haven't seen that video, be sure to check that out in the iCard, I was surprised how decent the hub motors felt, because when you first look at them, it seems like there's almost no urethane on there at all. But in reality, they actually don't feel too bad. And that's the same case here. And if I had to comment, I would say that these are definitely a little bit better than the ones on the V5. I'm not sure if the thickness of the thane is different, but when you look at them, they seem a little bit bigger, and it could just be the yellow makes it pop, and maybe the thane hangs over the edge a little bit more, but they feel ever so slightly more comfortable. And overall, they're really not that uncomfortable for a hub motor board. Regular thane, of course, is always going to be more comfortable because it's thicker, unless it's really crappy thane. But there's a lot of good wheels out there nowadays, so you don't really have a huge excuse for getting bad thane. Even the regular wheels, like these front 90mm wheels on here, they're pretty comfortable. The thane is fairly soft. I will do a thane hardness measurement on here, as I do with my other wheels, so you have an idea of how hard this urethane is, but it really does not feel too bad. It feels pretty soft. And with that softness, typically will also come a good bit of grip. And I'm not one to carve boards super hard, even less to carve hub motor boards, because hubs have less thane and generally don't handle bumps as well. So I'm not trying to do that, but in my riding thus far, the grip is not bad. I haven't really felt like it's sketchy or anything. So I'm pretty happy with how that's been performing. Time will tell, of course, how durable the hubs are. That's always a concern for thin sleeves like this. It's like, is it gonna chunk off the sides? Is it gonna wear out much faster than a board that has softer corners on the wheels? Hard to say. But hopefully it would last a little bit longer than the V5, because it's a little bit more money. Going through some of the other specs, we've already talked about the battery and the hubs. The deck is different than the V5, and I have to say, big improvement. I'm still not the biggest fan, but it's a lot stiffer, but also retains a little bit of flexibility. The V5 deck was borderline sketchy at times, and this is definitely an improvement. I don't know how many layers of wood the V5 was. This claims to be 8 layers of Canadian maple, but it definitely looks a bit thicker. It feels more sturdy, and it takes away some of that sketch factor of being on a cheaper hub board. And it still retains that handle, which, while aesthetically is not something I like, is very convenient for portability. And speaking of portability, this thing is fairly light as well. Again, another benefit of these cheaper light entry boards. So I'll put the weight on screen of that as well. Pretty easy to carry in one hand and really easy to pull in and out of the car. But you're probably looking at something more on the short commute side rather than a long group ride for this board. It's also got front and rear deck protectors. Seems to be coming pretty standard nowadays. The deck protector on my V5 was pretty bad, and the rear one actually snapped off. These feel like they're a little bit stronger, which is good. And grip tape, pretty much the same. Sometimes these manufacturers change the grip tape between boards, but this seems like it's about the same as the V5. Meepo actually has quite a few boards in their lineup now. And one other board that people might compare this to, maybe incorrectly, is the Voyager. This is not really a competitor for that, in my opinion. And while I'm pretty sure the Voyager started with the 12S3P, it's 21700 cells of, I think it used to be 40T, I don't know what it is now, but that's gonna have way more range, way more speed, way more power, and it's belt drive. So don't compare that to this. You wanna be looking at the X1 Max, the Backfire, what is it, G2, Backfire hub board, Walgo hub board, Varial. There's a lot of companies now, but this has a lot of competitors in its space. And Meepo, I think, is just trying to expand their customer base by sticking something right in between their cheapest board and their mid-range Meepo Envy. I don't really think there's anything wrong with that, but I have had sort of this thought for a while now that the cheapest board is not the best entry board, and I still stand behind that. If you start your journey on a Meepo V5 or an M1 now, it's going to be vastly different than if you start your journey on something that's a little bit more capable, something that you can grow into, and something that you maybe had to spend a little bit more time learning up front. Now, this sort of bridges the gap between a little bit higher performance and a cheaper entry price, and I think that's a good thing. This thing is supposed to top out at about 28 miles an hour, which is decently high. It's right up there with the X-Way Flex ER, and then technically the Flex Pro, which I was able to go 31 on. So we'll see how fast this thing can actually go. Not today, but we will check in our performance testing. So yeah, it's got an interesting little market segment there, but definitely not hitting up there with the Flex Pro in terms of performance at all. We're definitely looking at a more mild, easy to ride board with my favorite feature from these lingyi ESCs, which is hill hold. We'll demonstrate that here. It has a little parking symbol on the remote if you look at it when you're stopped, and it does a pretty decent job of holding you in place using motor current. And once you have this feature, any board that doesn't have it seems like it should have it because it's just really useful. The X-Way boards you can flip into quote-unquote free mode, which is full speed forwards and reverse. So basically when you hold the brake down at a stop, you would go backwards instead of just stopping. I don't really like riding like that because it feels a little bit sketchy. But this is a really good blend between standard brakes and something that can more or less hold you in place on a hill when you're waiting for a light, such as this. Of course, we're sitting on the disabled strip here, but it does a pretty good job. And I definitely would not want them to take something like that away on a newer model. So glad to see that it's still here. Now, this is just a hub board. It's not really a ton else about it that is interesting or innovative, but there is one last thing to cover, which is the remote. And man, this thing is an upgrade from the old remote on the V5/M1. And I will say it does appear, if you look at the M1 product listing, that the M1 uses this remote now as well. This is a huge improvement over the V5 remote. I'll put probably some B-roll on screen of the V5 remote if I have it. That thing, it felt like paper, and it was tiny, borderline useless screen, and very few settings to mess around with. Now, this does carry over the not a ton of settings to mess around with part, but it has a color screen, which I think is really neat. Maybe not necessary, but it's cool. It looks nice. It's more than bright enough to see in the daytime. You can probably even see it right now, which is quite impressive because some of the screens on these remotes are really tough to see in the sun or with polarized sunglasses like I'm wearing right now. However, this one seems to have no problem. The body of the remote is pretty much exactly the same as what's on the MLR. However, that one is the J6S remote, and this one is like the M6C. Yeah, M6C. I don't really know what the difference is, but they feel exactly the same. Oh boy. I was about 23 miles an hour there. Still getting used to these trucks, which are on stock stiffness, I might add. And we're on vibration bridge. You know, for how bad this bridge is, it could be worse. Not great, mind you, but I felt worse. I think the deck is doing a lot there to help absorb that. Now we're going back up the hill here. We're at full throttle right now, holding 18 miles an hour, and we're on 2 bars of battery. That's not really ideal, but again, we have to think about entry board here, and I'm pretty sure this is doing a lot better than the V5 did on this hill on its first lap. And I have pretty high confidence that you could do almost 2 laps with this board, probably 1.5 laps, which is like 10 to 12 miles. But yeah, we're on half battery now. That was partly due to sag. So even on a 3P, we're still sagging under a load. So that goes to tell you that the cells in here are probably not super high discharge capable cells. But in any case, I was talking about the remote. Like this remote a lot. It's pretty comfortable. It is on the larger side, which is a weird complaint to have given that I was just saying how tiny the other remote is. But I think Meepo overshot a tiny bit here. I think the body of the remote could stand to be a little bit skinnier. Feel the same thing about the MLR remote, but the thumb wheel travel is really nice. The thumb wheel feels pretty good. Not nearly as good as the metal ones from competitors like Backfire, Lorentz, or X-Way, or even Hoyt with the puck. But it feels very good for a plastic thumb wheel, and it has more throttle travel than average. And wow, we are sagging all the way down to 1 bar right now on a 3P battery. We've currently gone 4.4 miles. We still got at least, I think it's around 3 miles to get back, but it does recover from the sag pretty quickly, and we're back up to 3 bars. So very interesting. Really sags under load. All right, so given the performance on that hill, sagging all the way down to 1 bar, I have almost zero confidence that it will make 2 full laps on here, so I'll definitely need to bring my backup board on the second lap. But performance overall has been pretty decent. I will say this board feels like it's put together a little bit better than the V5. It feels a little bit more solid over bumps, and just really no major complaints from the build quality. I will say that the plastics on the bottom still feel pretty cheap. Again, in the cheap market segment, so it kind of makes sense. About the same as the Meepo V5. So, pretty decent experience so far. I'm gonna catch up with you guys when we are done with our loop. All right, we have come to the very end of our route, last like couple of 100 feet, and I just have some thoughts on this board. First off, I didn't mention it before, but the trucks are a bit upgraded. They have changed from the sort of bolt-on style hub motors to the slide-on style. So you have a solid axle that goes all the way through the rear truck with both hub motors on it. Pretty good for strength, definitely a big upgrade. And overall, these trucks and bushings, the combo of them is much better than the V5. I really found the V5 to be almost unrideable out of the box. Too wobbly and also too stiff at the same time. This has got a much better balance, but neither of them is quite as good as the Envy. New remote, great. New battery, better. We are currently at half battery. We've gone 6.3 miles, and it's sagging a lot. So as much as you would like to think that a 12S3P is a huge upgrade over that, what was it, 10S 2P and the V5, it seems like they may have used the same cells, which is fine in theory, and it makes sense for them financially, but I think the gains on here might be less than you would hope for versus like going from a V5 to a Voyager, which has 21700s. So pretty decent upgrades overall. I will say, for a hub board, I do kind of like the look of this deck. The enclosures could use some help. They're still really boxy. I just don't really, it's not my favorite design language, but overall, not a bad looking board. Cool looking hub motors, nice swappable sleeves, good upgrades on the trucks, and pretty decent experience overall for the price. We will be doing a full review on this board, so make sure to get subscribed and keep an eye out for that. We've got some other full reviews coming soon on the MLR, the Flex Paragon, and then a little bit after that, the Rev board. So make sure you get subscribed. Like this video if you want to see more first rides, and suggest what boards you want me to look at in the comments. I'm almost out of my review unit, so I'll be looking for new boards soon. And thank you guys for watching. Stay safe, keep on riding, and peace out.